Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Ron.
And we're here to talk about Maniac Cop, starring Tom Atkins, Bruce Campbell, Lorraine Landon, Richard Roundtree, William Smith, Ken Lerner, Cherie North, and Robert Zidar. Written by Larry Cohen, directed by William Lustig, released in 1988. Didn't do much at the old box office, but has obtained a certifiable cult status through cable and video releases through the years. Ron, what's your background with ye olde Maniac Cop?
Well, Jay, one of the things we talked about offline was you kind of briefly introduced how you had saw the movie, and this one is definitely a late night cable exclusive, probably through Joe Bob, Monster Vision, Joe Bob Drive-In Theater, or probably a USA Up All Night, because it's that kind of straddles the line of horror and sleaze. So it was probably on both of them, especially since it's a Troma movie, and we know that Troma was not real picky about who they distribute their movies to. But Troma I associate with the USA Network, so probably it's a Gilbert Gottfried Up All Night.
Yeah, I want to say that's my faint memories of the first time I saw this was definitely after 88, but in the Gilbert Gottfried, Up All Night USA kind of situation, it just feels like that. I remember seeing pieces of this here and there and then watching it and then sitting down years later to actually watch it in proper. And, at the time of this recording, it's on Peacock, and that's how we picked it out. It's just an aside. It's something that we've talked about before doing, and it's, it's neat to go back and look at movies that were at what I call the crest of the 80s horror, craze and stuff. Because 1988 is the absolute pinnacle of that, in my opinion. You've got Halloween 4, you've got Nightmare on Elm Street 4, you've got Friday the 13th 7, all of which are chapters that made, good at the box office and are ones that people generally liked, and then you've also got Child's Play that year. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out. And then 1989 is where it absolutely 100% crashes through the floor because you've got, Jason Taking Manhattan, the ill-conceived Halloween 5, which I know our friend Phil Walsh at Phil at the Movies loves, and I can stand for some of that too, but it's not nearly what Halloween 4 was. You've got Nightmare 5, which goes way off the rails with the Dream Child, and horror really just kind of hit a bump. And then it all became direct home sleaze schlock stuff for years until Scream resurrected the genre in the mid 90s. There were several years there where it was horror was just in the absolute doldrums. But in 1988, we're at the peak for all of this stuff, and there's a lot of varying background stuff about this. Larry Cohen is a king of the schlock horror stuff. I mean, The Stuff is one of his many things. It's Alive, which is a movie I'm somewhat familiar with. It's Alive, which is a movie I'm somewhat familiar with. I mean, his kind of stuff definitely fits the Jay and Ron corner of Film Strip, for sure.
Yeah, Larry Cohen is one of those classic New York guys that just don't exist anymore, where he is basically a guy. He writes movies set in New York. All of his movies involve New York somehow. Q the Winged Serpent famously takes place at the Chrysler Building. That's where Q lives, on top of the Chrysler Building.
Stay tuned for that sometime, by the way.
Which is a great movie. And, he died a few years ago, sadly. And you just don't get that kind of dude anymore, because it's such a specific, born and raised in New York character, born, raised, probably left for Los Angeles for a while, but mostly stayed in New York. And just really just churned out these crazy movies and stories. He did Phone Booth, was it Colin Farrell, I'm gonna say?
Yeah, Colin Farrell, Joel Schumacher, Kiefer Sutherland joined. That's actually a pretty good movie. So
yeah, and he did the killer 4th of July movie Uncle Sam.
I remember that.
He just wrote and produced all kinds of stuff. He was really involved with Ed McBain, the TV movies of the Ed McBain's detective series. He did the Body Snatchers, the '93 Body Snatchers. He did some NYPD Blue stuff.
I think you've
Yeah, he
hit
was
the
just
idea
like,
though of like New York as a character. In the
mhm.
1980s, the city was its own character. This is before the big cleanup and all this. The stuff that you think of New York now is very touristy, especially like Manhattan and all that kind of stuff. But at this time, man, it was like what Jason Takes Manhattan showed us, right? It was seedy, dirty. You would believe nuclear waste was just flushed underneath the city every night. It was that kind of place. So, and in 1988 mainstream America, away from those big cities and stuff, would look at a place like New York and go like, "Oh, that's a scary place to be." And then you add in this horror element, of course, to go with it. That it was a setting for it. I mean, I get the idea, and then you get this venerable cast of character actors who are from the genre. World, Tom Atkins and Bruce Campbell, and Sam Raimi's kind of a cameo in some of this somewhere, and then you get Richard Roundtree to come, be basically Shaft as police commissioner, which is hilarious. By the
Well,
way, on a lot of levels.
he was in New York at the time, so
Mhm.
it was a perfect get for him.
Oh,
Like,
totally, yeah.
to shoot a movie and not have to leave his house. It's great. Got to
Yeah,
be
but yeah,
great.
probably like shot in his living room for all we know. And then you find Robert Zadar, who we'll talk about, as a character too, but he is himself like this almost caricature of a human being, because he's got that condition with that really big jawline and all that stuff. And he made the most out of it, doing this kind of work. I think it was in like 100 and something films, basically playing, some version of heavy heat, but I mean, he's a specimen. You've got all this. It plays into all the sensibilities of the late '80s, right? The professional wrestling craze at the time, and horror, and all the stuff. I mean, which it blows my mind, and we'll talk about as we get into the film strip of all this. But like how this didn't work and didn't land because they only made it for $1 million, and it made like $600,000 at the box office. Like completely missed on people, which is wild to me.
If I had to guess, it was because they didn't distribute it widely enough.
Mm.
This from the very opening of this movie, logo. It's the classic Troma skyline with the weird like synthy score, and Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hers present. So that alone should tell you that nobody was like, they weren't putting this movie in theaters, most likely.
Yeah,
And if they did, it was on like 42nd Street at a grindhouse theater, backed up by I don't know. Just take your choice of bad sleazy movie.
Yeah, I think one thing I read that it was only in like, just a handful of theaters, like even less than 100. So the fact that it made $600,000 is pretty darn good. It means somebody went and saw it, but it just wasn't widely distributed, like you say. But then it found its life, in video and all of that stuff. But I don't know, man. It's neat to kind of come to this now, all these years later, and we look at cops and films differently. We talked a little bit about this on our January session show with Lindsay and Brian about, the way we view action movies, and, all this kind of stuff is different through our lens now. But in the 1980s, having an idea of a somewhat zombie or vengeful cop that's um, going after people that convicted him wrongly because of actual police corruption. Like, there's a lot of layers to this. For an 85-minute movie, there's a lot of stuff going on in this, man. I'm sort of blown away how much they pack into it.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it's the natural extension of like the Dirty Harry movies of the '70s, right? Especially when you got around to like Magnum Force and stuff, where that was a movie about like vigilante cops. New York was kind of the vigilante hotbed at the time. The Guardian Angels were just kicking off. You know, uh, there were people shooting up the subways to try to stop crime, and
Yeah.
very much a, a lawless feeling environment. And man, the drastic change when this movie stops filming in New York and starts filming in California is immediate and obvious.
Yeah, it really is. We'll talk about it when it happens too. But I mean, I feel like this is an extension of like the Death Wish universe, or 10 to Midnight. That kind of Charles Bronson Golden Globus world that they created with that stuff when they got into the Death Wish business after the first two movies that were somewhat serious.
Yeah,
Before.
it's
Yeah.
wild that it's like a Jason meets Death Wish movie.
Yeah,
It's wild
exactly.
that
Yeah. If
it's wild that like Larry Cohen had that idea, and it's wild that people gave him money to make it, even if
Right.
it
They
just
give him
went
$1
straight
million
to.
to make it. So
But the production company involved, who actually did it, not Troma, who just distributed it and bought the rights, um, was known for buying and making movies for the home video market, because in the mid to late '80s, when this movie would have been put into production, um, there were still independent video stores, and video renting was the hot new thing. So like there was this market, and if you put Robert Starr's big crazy face on the cover, or his shadow holding a knife, and you say Maniac Cop in the blood drippy letters font, people are gonna that's gonna catch your interest on the video aisle, especially if you've already gone through all the Dirty Harrys and Mitchell and all the other vigilante plays by his own rules cops kind of things.
yeah, Lone Wolf McQuaid and all the Chuck Norris action, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm with you. Shapiro Glickenhaus Entertainment, SGE. The thing I know most from them is Red Scorpion, which is an infamous film in and of itself. With Dolph Lundgren, we may get around to that one day too. So, but yeah, uh, a lot of backing on this one. But Ron, I think it's time to let people know what the heck Maniac Cop is about, besides just a Maniac Cop. So, besides Jason as a vengeful murder cop, what is this movie about?
Well, you kind of nailed. We kind of nailed it with that one, but basically, this movie is like if you took 1981's Maniac and made the lead character not a maniac but a police officer. So we even open up with the same sort of like opening credits montage of a guy putting on his police uniform with the badge and the gun and stuff. And uh, later that night, a young woman named Cassie is leaving a local police bar at night, where she is attacked by two young punks on the street who try to rob her. She gets away from them and runs and hides. Then she sees a cop in the park, and she runs over to him saying, "Help me, help me." Then she gasps. She sees his face, which is her first sign that this is not a normal cop, but a maniac cop. And then, as the two punks watch from a distance, the policeman picks her up with white gloved hands and snaps her neck, killing her. The next day, the punks are arrested, but they tell the police that the cop was responsible. Detectives Frank McRae, played by Tom Atkins, and Lovejoy, played by Lou Benacki, see the woman's strangled, mangled body at the morgue, and Frank believes the punk's claims of a murderous policeman just because the two guys who were arrested were way too small to smother a person with one hand. And, there's only one guy who's got those kind of hands. The following night, as a man and a woman stop at a stoplight in Manhattan, a cop approaches the car on foot and taps on the driver's side window with a billy club. The cop brings the man to the front of the car for a sobriety test, except it's not a sobriety test, it's a murder test. As the guy's like touching his nose and saying the alphabet, the cop pulls a secret blade from inside his billy club, slashes the guy's throat, and throws him on the windshield of the car, splattering blood all over the windshield. And another thing is straight out of Maniac. The woman screams, gets in the driver's seat, and races away, but the damage has been done, and the guy is dead. The next morning, Detective McRae goes to see the police commissioner Pike, played by the inimitable Richard Roundtree, at his office, and suggests giving all the policemen mental tests due to this latest cop-related killing. Pike refuses because why would a cop do anything that would assuage the fears of the public? And tells Frank to keep quiet about the killings, making a veiled threat by bringing up that Frank tried to shoot himself in an attempted suicide years earlier. That same evening, another man walking home on the street has an encounter with the same unseen killer cop, who throws him against the car and handcuffs him. The man runs when the cop pulls out his billy club blade. The cop catches up and shoves him down, and he falls into wet cement. The cop then puts his blade away and instead suffocates the guy on the cement in a very cool kill scene. And the next day, in a great smash cut, crews are forced to jackhammer the victim out of the dried cement. I
Can I
love that
just
scene.
talk about the awesomeness that they bothered to do a setup to show the day after that kill?
Yes.
Some
Ah,
poor union workers had to dig that dude out of that cement. So,
Yeah. As the body count rises, McRae tips off a local reporter about the maniac cop on the scene, and that sets people in New York into a panic. In a warehouse section of what's supposed to be Queens but is Los Angeles, a woman has car trouble when a cop pulls up behind her and gets out. He knocks on the window, she panics, pulls out a gun, and shoots the policeman, who, as we see from his face, is a normal cop, not a maniac cop. Meanwhile, speaking of people who may or may not be a maniac cop, Officer Jack Forrest, aka Bruce Campbell, is putting on his uniform while he and his wife argue about his job. He needs to spend more time at home and less time on the streets. She's afraid that with his nightmares and PTSD, she might get hurt when he freaks out. Jack leaves, and Ellen gets a creepy phone call, the first of apparently many, where a woman tells her that Jack is the maniac cop and he will kill again. Why won't you stop him? Ellen gets a gun and follows Jack to the local sleazy motel, which is supposed to be somewhere in Manhattan. After talking to the director, the manager of the hotel, William Lustig, he tells her that Jack has been there before. She goes up to the room where he is and catches him in bed with another woman, who is another cop. Ellen points the gun at them both without letting Jack explain. She's angry but relieved because he's not the maniac cop, but he is cheating on her. So she storms out. On the way out, she's grabbed by the real maniac cop and dragged into a van, which drives away, which suggests that the maniac cop has a maniac accomplice. The next morning, a maid at the hotel finds Ellen dead in the same room that Jack had rented hours earlier. The hot-headed police captain Ripley, who is veteran character actor William Smith, you've seen him in a million things, Jack's superior, arrives at the house to inform him about his wife's murder, and after Jack admits to being at the motel, Ripley has him arrested. In the interrogation room, they show Jack a collection of Maniac Cop news articles that belong to Ellen and read a page from Ellen's diary which says that Jack might be the killer. Jack denies it but refuses to answer any more questions because he doesn't want to get his affair partner into any trouble with the police because she is also a cop. Meanwhile, Frank tells Captain Riley that he believes that Jack is not the maniac cop, but he also believes that Jack is protecting someone, as we've discussed. Ripley refuses to accept this and tells Frank that he plots to charge Jack with all of the killings. Frank then goes to visit Jack in his jail cell, and Jack admits that he was shacking up with the lovely Lorene Landon, who plays Teresa McCoy. She's a vice cop and is posing as a prostitute when she herself is attacked by the maniac cop while Jack is in jail. Frank arrives and they both open fire on the cop, who flees. They go to drinks to talk about Jack's situation, and Teresa says the only person she told about her affair was Sally Nolan, Cherie North, a middle-aged, crippled policewoman who works in the clerical room of the precinct and has a mysterious connection with a different cop who we will talk about later. Frank follows Teresa in his car to a local pier on the Hudson River, except it's in the Pacific Ocean, where she watches her talk to the massive, still unseen maniac cop. Sally tells him about Jack's arrest and says that if he relaxes with the killing spree, Jack will be blamed for it all, and once they let their guard down, he can go after the commissioner, the mayor, and everyone else responsible for his false incarceration. Sally, in her diatribe, calls the maniac cop Matt and tells him to save his murderous rampage for the people who did him wrong. She spots Frank spying on them and opens fire, forcing Frank to run to his car and drive away. Frank goes to see Clancy, James Dixon, in the records department and reads old newspaper articles about a hero policeman named Matt Cordell, played by Robert Zadar, who was thrown into Sing Sing for quote-unquote violating people's rights, back when that was a thing that didn't get you arrested, which means he made some powerful enemies. Clancy tells Frank that Cordell had been dead for over 10 years and his former girlfriend, Sally Noland, attempted to commit suicide by jumping out of a window, but was only left crippled with a fractured left leg that needs a brace. Clancy tells Frank that Cordell was a well-known and respected cop, but he had little regard for the rules of force, like every cop in every movie ever. Cordell claimed that during his trial, his own superiors plotted to frame him and send him to prison after seeing that he was a troublemaker. In a flashback, we see Cordell in the shower at Sing Sing, where he's recognized by all the inmates he'd arrested and put there. He's attacked by 3 knife-wielding inmates. He puts up a good fight and beats them up, but then he gets stabbed in the back. As he falls, the rest of the men slash and stab and mutilate him in the face over and over again. Somehow this gives him a monster jaw and also many facial scars. Frank and Teresa go see Jack in jail, where they tell him about their suspicions that the cop might be Matt Cordell, who may not have died in prison. The happy couple are left alone while Frank goes to the clerical room, where he's attacked by Sally with her cane, and she screams, "He knows I'm no good to him anymore!" After she leaves, she sees a dead cop. She screams, "He's here!" The still unseen Cordell appears, grabs Sally, and Frank attempts to lead her away. Cordell slams Sally against the wall with superhuman strength. Frank pulls out his gun, but is thrown across the room by the maniac cop. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Teresa sees dead cops outside the cell block and knows that Maniac Cop is there at the station. She lets Jack out. He takes a gun off a dead police officer, and he sends her out to wait in Frank's car. While Teresa goes outside, Frank is attacked and thrown by Cordell through a window and lands on a parked taxi next to Teresa in one of the classic 80s guy falls out of the window and lands on a car kill scenes. Back in the station, Detective Lovejoy arrives and holds a gun on Jack, thinking he's the one who's killing everyone. He goes for a phone and reacts to touching Sally's dead fingers, as established in the very beginning of the movie. He's got a thing about dead people, and the thing is a bad thing. Jack punches him, gets his gun, and runs outside where he meets Teresa, and they drive away. The two of them keep Frank's appointment to meet Dr. Gruber at Sing Sing. After some questioning, Gruber admits that on the day Cordell was attacked, the doctor discovered he was still alive and revived him. Despite being stabbed multiple times, he was still brain dead. He was technically brain dead, but continued to live. Sympathetic to his plight and aware that he was framed, Gruber decides that Cordell should be declared legally dead and was released to the custody of a woman, even though he was still kind of brain dead. All this leads up to the big St. Patrick's Day parade. If you know anything about New York City or New York cops, St. Patrick's Day is a big deal. They have a nice big parade through the city. There's a pipe band, all kinds of good stuff. Perfect place for this kind of confrontation, right? Jack waits outside in the car. Teresa goes into police headquarters to warn Commissioner Pike that Cordell will be coming after him. Teresa makes her way up to the office where she tells him who the Maniac Cop is, but everybody kind of rolls their eyes and say Teresa aided in Jack's escape and refused to believe her. It is implied heavily here that Pike and Ripley were both part of the conspiracy to frame Cordell, just based off of the way they respond to the situation. A cop arrives to arrest Teresa while Pike and Ripley leave and are both murdered by Cordell in an elevator. The cop handcuffs Teresa to him as they are walking down a hallway, but Cordell pops out of nowhere and stabs him with his billy club knife. Teresa gets to a room where she manages to uncuff herself and climbs onto a ledge as Jack watches from across the street. Just then, a group of cops who think that Jack is the maniac responsible for all these killings grab him and throw him in a police van. The still unseen, they're really holding back on this face reveal pretty hard, pulls the driver out of the police van and drives away with Jack. Teresa gets a cop car and chases him down, heading to Pier 14, going all the way across the country from New York to Los Angeles, judging by the palm trees in the background. And that's where Cordell's hideout is. He stops the vehicle in his warehouse hideout and he starts to cut the door open. While Jack attempts to break out, Cordell, who we finally see is horribly scarring and decomposing and disfigured and stuff, picks Jack up and throws him on Teresa, who arrives and approaches with a shotgun. Cordell picks up the gun and blows away the other cop as he runs in. Jack knocks the gun away from the Maniac Cop, but he is punched by the super-strong zombie Cordell. As police sirens are heard approaching, Cordell gets back into the police van and attempts to drive away. Jack jumps on and tries to stop it from escaping. While driving erratically on the pier, the van runs into a suspended tube that crashes through the windshield and pierces Cordell's chest like he's Moby Dick or something. The truck, Cordell, and Jack fly off the end of the dock, crash into the water. A little bit later, as Jack and Teresa watch, the paddy wagon is pulled from the water by a police salvage team. But when they checked inside, Cordell is not there. Unseen, down in the water a short distance away, a pale, creepy hand rises up, and we get the Friday the 13th ending. Cordell is dead, but he's not dead because we end up making 2 more sequels.
Indeed, we do, and we'll get into what those sequels might or might not be. But yeah, like we said, a lot going on in this one. I'm glad you unpacked it kind of the long way, so we can kind of dance through it here. But I want to talk about our 3 central cop characters before we get to Maniac Cop, if you will. And that's first off, the venerable Tom Atkins as Detective Lieutenant Frank McRae, who's like an older version of every burnout cop you've ever heard of. He's seen some things and he's trying to get over it and deal with stuff. I absolutely love Tom Atkins because he always gives an earnest performance, no matter how schlocky the thing is he is in. And I feel like this cop, like his distant cousin, was the cop that had the situation with the may or may not be aliens out at Night of the Creeps in California somewhere. Like they feel like the same person.
Yes, they do feel very similar. And I could definitely see after, McRae stops the Maniac Cop, he would move out to Los Angeles and get a nice, relatively quiet job in some little college town. Except I think Night of the Creeps was before this one. So maybe he somehow survived the Night of the Creeps incident and was like, you know what, I'm going to go to New York where the only thing I have to deal with are normal maniacs, not like, zombie leech maniacs. But yeah, he is very much a grounding force in this movie. And it's great to see him when he pops up in things like this because he has such a very specific kind of energy, a world weariness without the anger that you would get from somebody like Dennis Farina, who was a real cop and thus probably carried around a lot more rage inside himself to tap into as an acting instrument.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's being kind of tired and sort of too old for this shit, but without being angry about it. You know, he's just sort of doing his thing, and that's what I like about it. And I had forgotten that he dies in the second act, and I'm like, oh wow, like Tom Atkins dying in a movie almost. Either it's because he's a side character and he's getting shot by Gary Busey, or he's is the hero in the end. And so I forgot he gets thrown out the friggin' window here and by Maniac Cop and dies in this movie. So that was a bit of a surprise. But I love him in this. He's so much fun, and he's really kind of there to move the story along and to show us that there's more to this than meets the eye. And you can tell like that he has that great scene with Richard Roundtree. And Roundtree's like, I can't believe you automatically assumed this was a cop or whatever. Like, you're hurting the department, blah, 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 and all that stuff. And I'm like, man, it's wild to see Richard Roundtree like defend the police department as the commissioner here. But I kind of dig it too. It's sort of fun, the way that plays out and the way that Atkins is clearly he knows like, yeah, that's not all true, but clearly there's a lot of like there's some he knows enough that he could have been Serpico, but he just decided to keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, it's probably a lot safer to not be Serpico, not be Serpico in that situation. But yeah, it's neat to see Richard Roundtree show up in this movie. He's always great. He's got kind of the. It's interesting to see, how far we've come in 10 years that the black guy is not the that the black character is not the loose on his heels detective guy, but is the authority figure, and the older white man is the kind of you know uh, streetwise detective uh, who is positioned under him. So I feel like maybe this is what happens after Shaft gets back from Africa and like decides to go straight and take them up on their job offer and becomes police commissioner.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it, right? And if you've seen that Samuel L. Jackson version of Shaft, it's obvious that Shaft has like done something pretty good because he's still working out there. Is that they play that off as it's all the same universe and stuff like that. But no, I dig him. I love how this movie like plays with this. You talked about like they take a long time to reveal what the Maniac Cop looks like, but they do cast this sort of doubt as to like who this could be. And the fact that they get Bruce Campbell, who is kind of a big dude. I mean, he's not Maniac Cop big, but he's a tall guy and stuff. And they play it off like you could think like maybe he is the cop, out doing vigilante work and killing people. And you get that kind of weird like who calls his wife to drop the dime on that? Like who is terrorizing the cops' wives to go like he's the killer? Like that seems so odd.
That was Sally.
That was Sally was like trying to do
Yeah,
interference work. Okay,
Sally was running interference for her old boyfriend, Maniac Cop.
I see. I feel like that is like stolen straight out of the plot of Psycho 2, where you got Vera Miles and Meg Tilly like trying to drive Norman to be a crazy killer person again, while they're out there like doing it actually, which of course you find out in the third act they're not, but you believe they are along the way. It feels like that's what that's ripped off from. But I did like that whole bit with him and his wife. He's obviously he's seen things, he's all this stuff, but he's really just cheating on her. Which is I'm like, oh man, like let's this movie as much as it's for like don't always believe the stuff about police corruption. So I was like, but these guys are also complete assholes. Like it's hard to like them.
Yeah, the only one who's like seems like super redeemable, or at least partially redeemable, is Tom Atkins. And
Yeah.
you can just tell by looking at him, he's a guy who's given some perps a rough ride every now and then too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but he feels bad about it. Like, you can tell, like he feels rough about it. His partner got killed. His gun went off. Like he's got this whole story. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's kind of messed up from it, but he's sort of on the other side of it. Whereas Campbell's just trying to survive day to day. He's tired of the dark-headed woman, so he goes after the blonde. Which I'm sure fraternization happens in every level of these kind of public service institutions, but they make it out here like it's, oh gosh, you can't be having an affair with another cop.
Well, I could see that it being still the 80s, it would be bad for Teresa's career if it
Right?
came out that, she was shacking up with a fellow officer, unlike now, apparently, where, we have all heard the stories about what goes on behind the doors at, precinct 69 or whatever.
Shoot, Sports Channel 49 is also. So I mean that seems to be everywhere. But no, you're right. It'd probably do more damage to her career than anything. But I do like the fact that they have a lot of chemistry. And I don't know Larlene Landon from anything. I've seen her and stuff, but I don't know her. I know Canadian actress or whatever. But she's actually got some pretty good presence here. She's a lot of fun. And her and Campbell have good chemistry.
Yeah, they really do. And man, in the 80s, Bruce Campbell could not get away from women named Ellen, because there's Ellen in Evil Dead, there's Ellen in Evil Dead 2, and then there's Ellen in this.
I
Like,
feel like that's almost an inside joke in some ways.
it would almost have to be, because these guys all saw Evil Dead.
Well, yeah. Well, and then
It,
again, Raimi's like hanging out on set, so like they're playing around with all that. And that's something only like you would know if you knew all these movies and stuff. But it is kind of a fun little side note.
yeah, and Evil Dead was a big hit in the scumbag circuit, Times Square theaters. So,
Yes, yes.
unsurprisingly.
Yeah, no, that and its sequel would have played in a lot of places. So Campbell was a good genre get, but I guess we got to get to him. Matt Cordell, the Maniac Cop, Robert Zadar. I mean, what a find, dude! This guy is. I don't know how to describe him in an audio format. You just need to go and look up the man and what he looked like and all of this. But he's built like a pro wrestler, but not like a famous one. He would be one of the like the mini henchmen in the NWO or something like that, you know. But he's definitely a
He
presence.
he's built like one of those professional wrestlers who had a huge career in Japan, but like never got out of the mid card in America.
Right. You would see him on AWA on Saturday afternoons or something on ESPN Classic. Like
But he's got a jaw like the um, Chad meme face uh, jaw.
yeah, yeah. It's just this big, almost like steel rope of a jaw and stuff. And boy, they
He's
really do hide it. Like they hide his face for a long time. You see it a little bit in that shower scene, but you don't see the full Maniac Cop reveal till much later in this movie.
Yeah, and in the shower scene, you just see a normal, like relatively normal face, just all slashed up with some great slash makeup. I got to say that the few times they show his face, the makeup is impeccable.
Oh yeah, look, we talked about it 100 times. Practical effects, man, especially at this time of the '80s, boy, that they're at the height of what they can do, and there's great makeup effects here. And again, for a movie that didn't have a huge budget or whatever, they clearly spent it on making sure that the killing stuff looked good. Like there's some good blood makeup. There's also some like disappearing makeup. Because like at one point his hand is straight up Michael Myers from the burn scene from Halloween 4. And then there's other times it's like clearly like the face makeup that they put on Donald Pleasance from Halloween 4. So it kind of comes and goes.
Well, they also try to make a point of only showing him wearing gloves, probably
Yeah.
because it's a gluing anything to your hand is going to fall off almost immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Well, what I love is that he's got the one glove. So it's Michael Jackson era. He's got the one white glove because he's in his full dress blues, but that one hand is exposed. And that's the one when he's carrying like his weapon of choice, this Billy Club knife thing, which is a wild weapon. And I can only think that I'm like, okay, they gave him a blade weapon because that's how he died, was he got shivved in the shower. So he would obviously take that on.
yeah, that's a neat pull that I really hadn't put together before now. Because yeah, it's definitely here's his bladed weapon of choice, and I like that it hides inside the Billy Club, so it's both a concussive weapon and a bladed weapon at the same time. Not that he really needs a Billy Club to mash someone's head. As we see in the shower fight, he fights off three guys at the same time in very impressive fashion, and he's also built like Stan Hansen or somebody.
Yeah, he's just this tank of a human being. But when they introduce him in that opening kill scene and stuff, where he catches the bar owner or whatever, and like double fists her up, and then it's like the way he twists her neck and stuff. It was such an '80s thing to break people's necks like that. But when they're in the corner scene later, it's like she got hung, but then her larynx is crushed too. Like the coroner has like way too much descriptive power over this woman's death. It's kind of weird and creepy. But again, if you've watched Friday the 13th movie, there's a corner always looking at Jason. Is like, how the hell is this ham sandwich alive?
Yeah, and it's definitely the size of the handprint on her neck is insane.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the handprint goes from her collarbone to her chin.
Yeah.
And I mean, Robert Zara does have some mitts on him, so I would buy that that's his actual hand. They just put some, powder on it and made him touch her neck, and that was how they did it.
I mean, did you have like handprints on your neck after your famous story of Kane Hodder, like basically choking you out when you got a picture with him?
Yes, I did. I did, and I had a beard at the time, not like this, but like a normal beard. So there was definitely visible handprint finger marks just in the like 30 seconds that he squeezed my neck to take the picture.
That is
And and
wild.
and
So,
to his eternal credit, he did not choke me breath wise. It was a blood choke. His hand literally went from one artery to the other, and like smushed them both, and little dots popped up in my field of vision. It was disconcerting and impressive, and also my face turned bright red in that picture.
having
It's
seen the
great.
picture, your face is bright red, and yeah, it's pretty wild. So, but yeah, but Sadar's got this, like you say, he's got these like oven mitts, for or baseball mitts for hands and stuff. But I don't know, man. I really, for somebody who has like no lines, he just grunts and growls and stuff like that. He really does a good job with the physical presence of this because he is latter day Kane Hodder type Jason, in this. Like he is this big hulking thing, and I got a question though, because I wasn't terribly sure when we get the explanation. Is he dead and a zombie, or is he not dead? I think at the end of the movie he's dead, but like, is he? How is he existing? I don't understand how that works.
Well, they imply that his body is alive, but his brain is damaged in the corridor scene later. But when he grabs Officer Mallory, when she's dressed like the prostitute and he attacks her, she says that he's ice cold.
Yeah.
And she also shoots him in the head twice, and it doesn't seem to phase him. And they both of them unload like full mag and full cylinder because she's got a revolver and he's got an automatic. They both like shoot till they dry fire at him and hit him, but it doesn't take him down. So I believe that he may be a zombie that is animated by the spirit of vengeance.
Okay, so that was the next question I had was what is driving him? Obviously revenge. We know that, but where is it coming from? And it's almost like a Ghost Rider type thing, you're saying?
It is framed as him coming back to get revenge on the people who wronged him, but because he did have the brain damage, he just starts killing indiscriminately at some point. Because I can't understand why the waitress at a cop bar uh, would be someone he would have to murder.
Right. Like who was she to anybody unless it was as Tom Atkins dropped later that he used to drop by there all the time. So maybe it was like a cop bar. So maybe some of the cops that framed him or something were there. Like you could believe that maybe. They don't do a good job of setting it up. You have to work on that as an audience member to get to that point. Otherwise, it's just random killing. But then on the other hand, man, like I don't know, maybe he is just random killing because the way Sally talks to him later, it's like, please don't, kill anymore until we can frame it on Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, they established that Sally's kind of the brains of the operation, but I also don't realize. I don't think that even she's aware of how far he's gone. He just is killing, and I don't think she is quite. She seems to think that they still have some sort of connection, and I feel like he's just whatever was Matt Cordell is gone.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Sally next because she is kind of like his handler almost in some ways, but like you say, she doesn't seem to really have any control over him at all. It's almost it's almost too much that she's involved in this still because you don't really need her. Like you could have her character be like this disfigured or permanently disabled person that they go and get information from. Like Silent Night, Deadly Night style. Like we go and visit her in the home, and she exposition dumps for us, and then Matt Cordell shows up and throws her out the other window. To finish her off. Because the story is that, like, oh, good Catholic girl like that threw herself out the window after he died or whatever. But maybe it would have been better if he had like rampaged her, she survived, and then somehow he comes back for her again. I don't know that I needed Sally to be the thing that was trying to tell him what to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's entirely necessary either. But also, she's been damaged by the police as well. She lost her boyfriend in Cordell, and she also, has been left permanently crippled as a result of, um, throwing herself out the window after he gets arrested and sent off to maximum security prison.
Right. And
So maybe
yeah.
she's also trying to use him as an instrument of her vengeance.
Well, I mean, that's the whole theme here, right? Is that we're playing on this idea of like fear of authority and the plot of corrupt cops in the 80s and all that stuff, but and meshing it with this vigilante justice meets this Friday the 13th, type killer and stuff like that. I mean, it's a real mix of things. And I the idea of that is kind of genius in a way. Like it's shocky, but it is sort of smart to mash all those things together. It doesn't entirely work, but it's like a real interesting like experimental menu. Like oh, part of it's good, but maybe part of the entree is not cooked just exactly right. But it's a neat idea. I give them credit for inventiveness of taking other parts and putting them together.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Larry Cohen does. He figures out a way to put weird things together that don't always like go together completely, but he figures out a way to kind of make it work. And he's very much a dude who has a lot of like crazy ideas, right? Like if you think about the stuff, it's a monster movie, but it's also like a critique of consumerism. If you think about Q the Winged Serpent, there's like a vigilante detective in there, but there's also like, a giant monster flying around New York City. It's he does all these weird like movie mashups of things that probably shouldn't work together as well as they do, but somehow he makes it come out okay.
And
And in the right with the right budget and with the right people behind it.
well, it's almost like he's years ahead of the Freddy versus Jason, Godzilla versus Kong revisits that we do, and have done, and people are into these days. This getting my chocolate and peanut butter, GI Joe versus Star Wars, kind of situation going on, and with the right budget and the right kind of shepherding, that can work. The problem with like some of this is that obviously there's no strong. I mean, he is the producer, so he's telling him on his own self. He's giving him his own notes on the thing, and the director's just going with it at this point. So there's no one there to go like, Larry, this is cool, but what we really need to do is focus on this, or maybe make this character more this thing. And you wonder like, oh, if this could exist in a world where there was a good, strong like back team behind it, what it would look like.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's one of those movies where like if you brought in too many people, the broth is going to get spoiled pretty quickly. And I'm a kind of a Larry Cohen fan. I enjoy his weird genre mashups that he does. I enjoy the weird like nervy kind of energy that his scripts all seem to have. And we've talked about his use of New York City as a character throughout a lot of this, and I love that time period. And he's just that kind of weird dude that doesn't come around much anymore, or that ever came around a lot at all. To be fair,
Yeah.
um,
Most of them don't make it out of the system. They get swallowed up inside of it or something like that.
yeah, and I feel like that he. I would rather see like an uneven effort that's driven by one dude clearly has a an idea that he thought was cool than something a little bit too polished. It's like, do you want Steve Albini to produce your record where it sounds raw, or do you want like uh, Bob Rock to come in and smooth it all to like a Zamboni machine?
Yeah. How polished do you want this versus the raw essence that it really was? You're right. Like I say, it's like experimental theater or experimental restaurants. It's not all quite there, but the effort and the idea is cool, and that's what makes it neat. And again, mixing all these things together. I gotta say, man, the kills in this again. They hearken to a lot of the Friday the 13thness of it, but the police station kill off feels a whole lot like 1984's Terminator. Like it feels like they watched that and were like, we're just going to redo that, but without any of Lance Henriksen or the gun shooting or Paul Winfield.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that there is some Terminator influence. But a thing I also feel like was heavily influenced by it was Assault on Precinct 13,
Very good call.
a
Yeah.
similar no budget police shoot 'em, stab 'em up kind of movie, but in reverse. Rather than it's just a bunch of people trying to get in and then one guy, a few guys trying to hold them off. It's one guy trying to get in and a bunch of cops trying to hold him off, but they fail because he's a Robert Zadar sized zombie monster man.
Right. Well, I mean, Assault on Precinct 13 is John Carpenter's version of the Alamo, and mixed with like the Warriors and stuff like that, which I dig on that level. It's not a perfect movie, but it's fun. And it definitely has a striking opening with that ice cream girl kill. And this movie would have done well to have something like that because all the people that Maniac Cop goes after, they're adults. Right? Like it would have been wild if just randomly he just picked up some kid off a bicycle and just threw him into a trash truck or something like that. Like that's mean, but that's the kind of movie this is too. Why did it not do that?
Yeah, I feel like it could have benefited from a little bit more meanness, and I can't help but feel like at a certain point he was like, you know what, we're getting a little too sleazy, or possibly things had to be cut out to get an R rating on the VHS box.
Could have been, yeah, because there's definitely a lot of gore. Like this is the graphic violence in this is what gives it its rating, at least according to the version of it I watched, and I can see it. Especially for the 1980s, man. This is the MPAA is cutting movies to shreds at this point, anyway, especially horror movies. And that's part of what happened with some of those 1989 movies is that I mentioned earlier is they just got hacked to death in the editing room. So you don't even know what half of what was missing in some of those things. Some of it's been restored through the years, now, but at the time, that's why it is at least a little disjointing. And for a low budget movie with a studio that doesn't have clout to like really push the MPAA around, like there's nobody gonna go fight for this, in the editing room.
Right. And I also feel like, at a certain point, it's like, how much is too much? Because he'd already done, like, by this point, Larry Cohen had already done It's Alive. So he'd already had like a weird killer child monster movie.
Hmm.
So maybe he didn't want to like retread over old ground, or he wanted to have like, what if the It's Alive baby became, a cop or something? Who
Right,
knows?
right. Which, by the way, it's alive, and this movie called The Kindred that Nick's a big fan of. I don't know if you've ever seen that thing too. And Amityville Three's poster live in the same universe together. Yeah, like they kind of have a shared spirit with one another.
Yeah, it's that totally makes sense. I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen the movie you talked about, but I've seen The Kindred and I've seen It's Alive, and like, yeah, I could definitely see that being a shared universe.
Yeah, completely. Because it's all, again, secrets and all that kind of stuff. You can go through all that as you want. I do like the ending, though, that it's this sort of broad daylight, definitely not shot in New York, kind of moment here on the dock where he's hiding out and how Bruce Campbell basically drives him into a pole to impale him into the car. And then he goes over the old pier. There, I did think that was pretty cool, but at no point did I think when they fished that thing out of there, especially with the number of cops and photographers hanging around it, he was still going to be in it. Like it was either going to be one of two things: the hand that we get on the pier dock, or he was going to be in the car, and then the last shot was going to be his eyes open all of a sudden, and they just cut straight at the screen. And so you assume that he just takes out that whole mob of people.
Yeah, he does the Jason Voorhees hospital special where he beats up
Yeah,
kills an ambulance full of people or whatever. Or the actually, technically, I think that was a Michael
that,
Myers
that
movie.
was Michael Myers in part 4.
Yeah, Jason is always coroners. Michael Myers is usually ambulance attendants for some reason.
Doesn't like being transported on Halloween Eve. We've learned that through the cinematic years. But
Yeah, probably a mistake.
yeah,
But yeah, um, yeah, that's definitely the part where they shot in Los Angeles. Probably because New York was like, no, we've got enough stuff in our river. If you drive a truck if you drive a police truck in the river with the stuntman jumps off. He's going to come back as a skeleton with like eyeballs floating in his skull because the
yeah.
acid in the East River is going to dissolve him.
Right, either that or he's actually going to see bodies and it's going to traumatize the actor for the rest of his life. Like there's stuff happening.
Yeah, they're going to crash that car on top of a big pile of dumped mafia cars, and it's just not going to
Right.
go under the water. It's going to
Yeah.
skip across the river like a stone and end up in New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's probably a wise choice to redo that. Plus, you've got more stunt people to do the work out in California than you do. They haul them all to New York, costs a lot of money, put them up, whereas they're just at home, in LA doing that on a Friday.
Yeah, and it's great how in that scene where uh, the truck goes over the edge and flips over, and the stuntman jumps off. That Bruce Campbell's character allegedly apparently grows a beard in 30 seconds.
Yes. Yes.
And then also when they're pulling the um, the paddy wagon out of the river, in quotes, the river, you can see palm trees in the background as they're moving it across the Los Angeles skyline.
Yeah. Yeah. But they were definitely not worried about the background coverage because they were hoping you weren't paying attention at that point. But that's what we do here. You notice these things. So, I mean, can you think of other films like this that for people who dig this that they might want to watch? We've already dropped Terminator sort of lives in that universe and stuff. But what else is like Maniac Cop out there?
Oh man, that's a great question. So we've dropped a lot of things that I would recommend watching. I would watch any movie filmed in New York in the 80s, honestly.
Mm, yeah,
So if you haven't seen The Warriors or you haven't seen Chud, go out and see The Warriors, go out and see Chud.
it definitely feels like a Chud China universe movie. Yeah,
Pick up any of Larry Cohen's movies from this time period because they're all going to be in this New York and they're all going to have similar vibes. Like um, God Told Me To is a great, like, sleazy um, serial killer movie, but the serial killer says that God is the one who's telling him to kill these people before they can do crimes. It's really a fascinating, weird movie. And like this, it combines a lot of elements of like weird shoot 'em up, slash 'em up stuff with this police procedural, with also like some social commentary about the spate of serial killers in the 70s who were like, the dog told me to kill those people, you know.
yeah, the Son of Sam stuff.
So yeah, the Son of Sam thing. Yeah,
Richard
see,
Ramirez, all that.
yeah,
Yeah,
watch the stuff. There's a
mm.
young John Goodman in there. Um,
Very young John Goodman. Yeah,
yeah, Q the Winged Serpent is a great movie if you love monster movies because the Quetzalcoatl itself is so fun to watch, just like fly around and make a big nest in the Chrysler Building. That movie's a blast. Also, there's Richard Roundtree in that too, um, and James Dixon, who's also in this movie. Um, yeah, he also did a great movie in the late 80s. It's the last Betty Davis movie. It's called Wicked Stepmother. Um, it's not, a Maniac Cop type cop movie, but it's a weird blend of like fantasy and black comedy and just crazy elements. And there's also another great movie he did in the 90s, early 90s, 90 or 91, called The Ambulance with Eric Roberts, about this ambulance that's going around New York City picking people up, but they never end up in the hospital. They just kind of disappear. And that one has some cool cameos with a bunch of people from Marvel Comics uh, who were apparently nearby when Larry Cohen was shooting this movie.
that that is exactly the kind of guerrilla bowfinger filmmaking that you would expect from this guy and the studio he's working with. That's exactly right. Have you seen either of the sequels to this though? Because I have not seen Maniac Cop 2 or Maniac Cop 3: The Badge of Silence.
I've seen all three of them. They're great. Like it's more of the same but goofier. Um, so if you kind of dig what's going on here, you'll probably really dig those because they're just like, what if Maniac Cop, but like kind of hilarious.
Lean more
Uh,
into the comedy part of it as they go
yeah,
forward.
well, and also like one of them, you get Robert Davi.
Yeah, I think you said
Maniac
both
Cop,
of them is what I
yeah,
read. Yeah.
Maniac
So,
Cop 2 and 3. I think Robert Davi's in it. So if you want a battle of like two great weird faces, him versus Robert Zadar is just fabulous.
that is good. I know Bruce Campbell comes back for a cameo in the sequel. I did read that, but he didn't hang around to do all of it. So, but no, Robert Davi, one of the Agent Johnsons from Die Hard, for those that don't know the face, or one of the bad guys in License to Kill if you're a Bond fan.
Yeah, and there's another great character actor in that one in 2 called named Leo Rossi.
Oh
You'll
yeah,
you'll see him immediately. Oh, it's that guy.
yeah, Yeah, you can't miss Leo Rossi. Those who are Halloween 2 fans, the original Halloween 2 from 1981, know Leo Rossi is the incredibly skeezy ambulance driver in that movie that dies in the hot tub scene, if you will. So
Yeah, his whole career has been incredibly skeezy blank.
yes,
And
yeah,
also, fun fact, Maniac Cop 2 has a very young Danny Trejo, well, relatively young Danny Trejo in it, playing a prisoner.
that would have been really like on the nose for him at the time. So because he had just gotten out, probably. So,
He'd been out for a while and he'd been clean for a while because this is like 1980, probably shot in 88.
okay, all right. So that
So
was
he'd
yeah,
been out
was a little bit
he'd been
later.
out for a
Yeah.
while, but he was still typecast as very much I'm the prisoner guy.
Yeah, which
So,
was through the end of his career. I think he's been that guy. So I mean, they tried to reboot this at one time, or they were going to, and then they even did like a Maniac Cop TV series. They shot a pilot of, but it never moved forward or anything. Could you see this like being remade or rebooted at some point? I would be afraid it would become too self-serious if they tried to redo it now.
I would think that, but one of my favorite horror remakes ever is the Maniac with Elijah Wood,
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
and that's fabulous. And all they did was move it from New York to L.A. and kind of tinker with the idea of it. Like if they moved this to L.A. and they made it like kind of a Michael Mann meets Jason Voorhees movie, I would like that would be fabulous to me.
That would be a whale of a mix. I feel tonally that may not entirely work. I feel like you got to just lean into the goofy and like have fun with it again, and definitely set it in the 80s. You can't set this in modern technology or something like that. I think it would be fun to redo it and just lean into the camp and the fun of it, because I do think there's an audience for that to this day. But I feel like if you did, I like your idea, but I do feel like, oh man, that would just be such a whiplash to try to balance together in the same movie. It may not work.
Yeah, and I feel like the third one, the rails have completely come off because it went through a lot of like bad reshoots and stuff because basically they funded the movie by selling it to the Japanese market, and when the Japanese market were like, "You're going to put a black guy as the lead character? No way!" So they had to do a complete rewrite and redo of the movie. But it's fun because there's some fun Jackie or Haley in there.
Oh,
Um,
early, yeah, that was before he was super famous at this
yeah,
point. So
well,
yeah.
between the time he was super famous as a child and the time he was famous as an adult, he did Maniac Cop 3.
I mean, we all have those moments in the careers, I guess. You dip into where you can. So, speaking of dips, we're at the part where it's time for us to dip and give our final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So, what are yours for Maniac Cop?
I'm gonna give Maniac Cop a medium popcorn with extra butter. It's not quite a large popcorn for me, but it's got enough weird energy through Bruce Campbell's acting and Tom Atkins act. Like there's a scene in the movie early on with Tom Atkins and Richard Roundtree where they're talking about the attempted suicide of uh, Frank McRae and the just the interchange between those two actors is great. And like it's a sign of what this movie could have been if there had been like a more serious mindset behind it. But it's Larry Cohen. Larry Cohen's here to have fun, and to for Larry Cohen, fun means we're going to hurl some people through some windows. We're going to smash a guy onto a hood of a car. We're going to have some creature feature makeup on a dude with a weird face. We're he's here for a good time, not for a long time. And I feel like this movie dense but short, and it never really kind of lets up. It balances the police procedural parts with the Robert Zadar parts pretty well to me. So medium popcorn.
Ron, I'm going to join you in that medium popcorn, but I'm not going to put butter on it. I'm going to go with that like high school ballpark salty medium popcorn, because I feel like this movie's got that kind of saltiness to it, where a little bit of it goes a long way, but it's just enough to be good. Like you said, it's a really dense movie, but it's also short, and that's an appeal to it. It doesn't require a lot. You'll put a lot of thought into it if you want to, but why? The people making it weren't doing that. They were just taking those elements and those plot points and those tropes and just mashing them together. And I feel this movie is like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, where let's mash like gothic metal, and Judas Priest with all the classical music you love about Christmas. And you know what? For a little bit, sometimes that works. And much like that music, this movie works on that level. So yeah, good, solid, salty, medium popcorn for me. Well, it's been a lot of fun talking about it with you here, Ron. Of course, folks, you can find this and all other episodes in the archive section of Film Strip Podcast, everywhere you can find your podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We're all in all the places. And you can find us on all the social media too. At Film Strip Pod is our handle. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think of the show. And hey, what did you think of the mashup of Maniac Cop? We appreciate the support. So until next time, for Ron, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.